I thought we would talk a little bit today about why books just don't seem that good anymore. I feel like we get a few hits every now and then, like The Hunger Games, Harry Potter, maybe Twilight. That's kind of in a funky category. If you want to count that, you can. It's a classic, but like more like an infamous one. But I just feel like books nowadays just aren't that good. You have all these celebrities and influencers like recommending these books. They're all hyped up. They have the reviews. They have the TV, movie adaptation deals. You get them and you're like, wow, that was pretty bland. Like, what's going on? What's going on? I thought we could kind of take a deep dive into that and why it seems like the standard for books has just really kind of gone down. And if you've been wondering the same thing, it's because publishing has become more profit focused. Ayad Akhtar, who is a Pulitzer Prize-winning playwright and president of PEN America, puts it really well, and I think I want to kick off with a quote from him. He says, "Writers are figuring out how to fit into a system where executives who are ultimately non-creative are making determinations about what's going to work on a platform." And I think that's a very astute observation. So an example of this is probably the writer's strike that we had this past year. At streaming companies, creative executives were very quickly being replaced by tech executives who drove the industry toward making production decisions based on data sets about the kinds of stories that held audiences' attention, right? It just seems like it's been boiled down to a bottom line, to a formula, to an algorithm in recent years, whether it be through TV and movie, whether it be through books. I just feel like there's been a lot of mergers and buyouts lately that's something that there's going to be like a changing of the guards in both of those industries. And I'm going to be getting into that a little bit too. The question we're really asking in this video is, what made this happen? What made books not be that good? These executives chose profit over risk, really, in my opinion. If I had to put it in my own words, that's what I would say. So where it gets interesting was when I did a little bit of Googling and I came across a couple New York Times articles, one from 1977 and another 10 years later from 1987. I was doing a little bit of Googling to see how far back this switch happened from creative risk-taking to more like algorithmic, formulaic profiting. And this article from 1977 is called Merger Fever in Publishing. And basically this talks about how there seemed to be some cause for concern when it comes to large media conglomerates and their long-term effects on the industry. This article is from 1977, and that's what they're saying. And there were two takeaways that I pulled from this article. One was a little excerpt in it that said, "This phenomenon has aroused concern in the Authors Guild that book publishing is losing its rich diversity and that ROI, return on investment, rather than aesthetics or public responsibility, will come to dominate the print media." And even then, in 1977, the Justice Department and Federal Trade Commission, or FTC, were investigating the antitrust implications of the merger trend. This was something that happened within the past year, like the past year or two at most, when Penguin Random House was trying to acquire Simon & Schuster. Can you imagine how massive of a company that would have been? Talk about dominating the book space, right? Even in the late 70s, the Department of Justice and the FTC were keeping an eye on these mergers that were happening. I find this so interesting, and this is relevant for the question that we're asking of why or when did books become a little bit more bland or a little bit more vanilla. There's a whole back-end production that's been brewing for the last 40 years. And a second takeaway that I got from this article highlighted the effects of economic competition. Clearly, economic pressures account for part of this, particularly when the capital required to compete in the business is escalating. Because of the rise in bookstore chains, which are interested in buying fewer titles and more bestsellers than the mom-and-pop stores they are replacing, the demand for top authors is soaring, as are the prices paid to them, which means that it's becoming more difficult at this time. It was becoming more difficult to publish or to sell books by unknown authors. So think about it. You hear all of these glamorous stories about debut authors getting $300,000 book advances. That's expensive. Penguin Random House, Simon & Schuster, Macmillan, HarperCollins, whatever, they are paying authors these huge bucks because they want to acquire them. In fact, some publishers will go so far to compete in a preempt, which is basically where publishers compete with one another to offer the author and their agent the highest price point possible to take them off the market completely. This is something that it's very common in the publishing industry. The second article that I came across in the New York Times from 1987 is called Why Book Publishers Are Targets for Merger. And this is also something that I want to touch on. I mentioned that I was going to come back to this. There are 3 reasons mentioned in this article that explain why these mergers have been happening. The first reason that they list is prestige-based. There's a strong allure to owning a company that is part of a creative and prestigious industry. Publishing, writing, academics, they have this connotation of being very lofty. All of the greats, Shakespeare, Ernest Hemingway, you think of these people who are in this place of prestige because of the work and the art that they create. So there is a credibility element when if I were a parent company and I say that I bought Simon & Schuster. There's a whole lot of prestigious opportunities that can come out of something like that. So that was the first reason. The second reason is that there's the potential to acquire valuable backlist titles. And if you don't know what a backlist title is, I briefly mentioned this in one of my other videos that I'll plug in. When you publish a book, it's only new for a year in the eyes of the industry, in the context of the industry. So if Prince Harry's Spare, for example, that was just the first one that came to mind. It was published in let's just say January of 2023. By January of 2024, it will shift from a front list title or a new book to the backlist title. And the goal of every publisher is to have a backlist that is so successful that even though these books aren't new, they're going to continue passively selling just because the word of mouth is so strong. That's why these types of publishers, especially large publishers, are so picky about the types of titles that they bring on. You either have to be someone or know someone. Whereas it takes years to develop a rich backlist, a timely acquisition or merger can supply one overnight. This is just a case of working smarter, not harder. And the third reason listed in this article for why mergers happen within the context of 1987 is that acquisition and merger are ways publishing houses can double their revenues without doubling their costs. And I think I kind of sort of alluded to this a little bit before, but this often requires consolidating those two sales forces and production staffs, which often include editorial departments or editors, and there's just a lot of slashing and cutting and whittling down that has to happen. That's just a part of going through a merger. So those are some of the little bits of information that I was able to grab when I'm talking about having a profit-focused perspective on books rather than just acquiring new titles by unknown authors based on their creative merit alone. Now, a lot of it has to do with who you know, the market that your book is entering into, which a lot of that is out of your control, marketing and promotional and publicity efforts that you are able to contribute to, because publishers, that's expensive for publishers to roll out the red carpet with marketing and publicity. They want to know that you're able to sell 10,000 copies yourself. So how does this play out into the world of books that you and I can see for ourselves when we're thinking of celebrity book club picks, when we're thinking of influencer campaigns on Book Talk? So some of these people with book clubs are, of course, Oprah Winfrey. She had a book club back in her heyday, and now she has an Oprah's Book Club 2.0. It was a 2012 relaunch of that original book club that she did. We have Emma Watson's Our Shared Shelf, which started in 2016. That's more of like a feminist book club. You have Read with Jenna that started in 2019. You have Mindy Kaling, her book club launched in 2022. And finally, the one that everyone's probably most familiar with is Reese's Book Club. And this launched in 2017 after she was posting a lot about the books that she was reading just kind of casually on Instagram. There was an article that I found on Reddit, and a lot of these people on here agreed that most of the books that have been selected for her book club have just been kind of vanilla, have been kind of bland. I even poked around on Goodreads and sort of randomly clicked on some of her past titles, and majority of them averaged about 3 or 4 star reviews. Very few of them scored 5 stars, and those are all the classics that we know now, like Where the Crawdads Sing, Daisy Jones and the Sixth. I almost said the fifth. But the commonality with a lot of these groups, not all of them, but probably most of them, a good handful I would say, are choosing books from maybe debut authors that happen to be published through large publishers with large advances or preempt deals. These are books that are already guaranteed success. Now, when we're talking about influencer campaigns and how all this plays out in something like that, because Book Talk became extremely popular over the last couple of years due to the pandemic. Everyone was at home. No one really had anything to do because they were all quarantining. So they got books. They were looking for recommendations, like what are you reading? And that's how Book Talk sort of sparked and came to be. Colleen Hoover was born out of Book Talk. That's probably the best example. What's interesting that I don't know if many people know is that recently TikTok created an imprint based on the success of Book Talk called Eighth Eighth Note Press in order to kind of capitalize on this massive growth. Where things might get skewed is that because they're publishing authors through this TikTok book publishing company, there are some worries that that could influence the algorithm. That algorithm on TikTok might prefer Eighth Note Press authors based on people who are just recommending good books that they genuinely just like. Another example of an influencer campaign that is also lesser known is called Bindery. I'm not familiar with it, but I've just been hearing things about it. And it launched this year in August of 2023, and it leverages the power of social media by turning influencers into publishers. Again, I don't really know much about this. I haven't gone down the rabbit hole with this, but it just sounds very with the times. So with that explanation of maybe why I personally suspect books just aren't maybe as good as they used to be, the question now is, what do we do about it? Because if you're going to talk about a problem, you have to offer some perspectives, approaches, or solutions. So I have a few. Take them how you want them. I would say for sure to continue calling out and pressuring these large publishing companies to value and prioritize diversity, equity, and inclusion within their writing titles, because publishing as a whole is known for being very, very white heavy. A lot of people who work there are white, and a lot of the authors that come out of them are white, unless you're someone who maybe has a lot of industry connections or something. Even Yellowface, which came out this year, commented on that. I wanted to like the book, which is a whole other thing, but that one was just okay. Publishers respond to trends and markets, right? So if there's a need, there's a market. If there's a conversation, there's a trend. I would also say to continue supporting your local small presses, your mom and shop presses. So, they're going to be there at literary festivals. They're going to be probably partnering with other local bookstores to feature their books. You can buy books directly off their website. If you know of someone who's wanting to publish, encouraging those small presses. Small presses tend to be, they're willing to kind of be a little bit more patient with new authors. They tend to be more open and accepting of lesser known authors who maybe don't have those industry connections or don't have that big of a platform. I was published through a small press. I love small presses. And I would also say that it wouldn't hurt to join or maybe follow any local writers associations that are in your area. There's usually regional chapters or something like that, or local chapters. But it's just, I mean, being aware of this kind of stuff is a good starting point in itself too. Starting a conversation around these lesser known pieces of books and book publishing and book writing and kind of things that happen behind closed doors. So I hope you found this interesting. I just sort of thought of this idea when I came across a book that just kind of had okay ratings, and it just kind of got me thinking. So I hope you got something out of it. I'm sure that I pushed some buttons for some people that are watching this video, but you can't deny that it's happening. It's one of those things where I think people know about, but you're not supposed to say. I don't know. I just think it's worth starting a conversation around it and offering more transparency into the publishing book space. So feel free to like and subscribe if you got something out of this, and then I will see you in the next video. See you later.